one and all, to this second episode of Tumblrisms. Today we've got quite the treat for you. We're going to be taking a look at the phenomenon known as thin privilege on Tumblr. Now, you may have heard other terms used in relation to this, maybe even interchangeably. Things like body positivity or fat acceptance. The thing to keep in mind, though, is we're specifically going to be looking at thin privilege. Now, there are vague definitions that separate all of these, and I wouldn't expect anybody to really know it. But what exactly are we looking at? What is thin privilege? Luckily for us, there's a very well-known Tumblr that deals with this. That's one of the main reasons why we're sticking to thin privilege. Chances are, if you've been on 4chan or Reddit or a host of other forums, you've seen different postings or screen caps or quotes from this specific Tumblr. It is the mecca when it comes to fat and crazy on Tumblr. Well, hell, it is the mecca when it comes to obese insanity on the internet, period. However, before we get into that, before we jump headfirst into that, let's back up a little bit and kind of look at the people we're talking about. Because we're going into a crazy world here of really, really overweight people who, for the most part, don't think there's anything wrong with that. In fact, that's what all those terms are: body positivity, fat acceptance, thin privilege. When you get down to brass tacks, what these people think, the idea that they have in their head, the philosophy they live their life by, is that, morbidly obese people aren't sick or unhealthy. It doesn't affect your longevity, your health, your quality of life, your relationships, or ability to work or have fun or to really do anything. To them, the BMI, body mass index, is just voodoo that was dreamt up in the dungeons of some Nazi scientist with the whole point of oppressing fat people. And we're not really even talking about people who are rationalizing. All right, there's a distinction here. You may be overweight, you may be fat, hell, you could even be obese, and you may not really think it's that much of an issue. Right, specifically to you personally, you might not find it to be a big issue. However, to them, fatness in general is completely fine. You may look at yourself, you might be overweight, like I said, and you might think, well, shit, I'm a big guy, I'm a big girl, whatever, and whatever, I'm fine with it. But deep down in the pit of your stomach, as big as that fucking stomach might be, that you are a fat person, and that generally, being a fat person has a lot of disadvantages. And there are reasons those disadvantages exist. You're wreaking havoc on your body to begin with. I mean, you don't need to be a fucking physically fit person or a doctor to understand that. I mean, at some base level, I think everybody pretty much has it in the back of their head that, you know what, probably not the best thing. This is the same with anything that's not done in moderation. Especially, we're talking about fat people and overeating and that kind of thing. But anything without moderation is bad. Alcohol, cigarettes, it doesn't really matter. There are always negative consequences to the action. And most informed, normal, rational people understand those consequences. I mean, it's been put out there so much that there's no way you can really miss them. But to these people, those consequences are bullshit. They don't acknowledge they exist. For the most part, they say, when you ask them or when you talk to them about this, you can be huge. You can be 400, 500, 600 pounds and be completely healthy. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no disadvantage. Diabetes and heart disease, lung problems, circulation issues, not related at all to it, right? Their livers and kidneys, all the organs are functioning fine. The bone structure can handle that weight. Cardiovascular health is 100%. There's nothing wrong with being overweight. And that's, in their minds, nothing wrong at all. What they eat, the kinds of foods, saturated fats, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. This whole notion of being thin and being fit is some kind of perpetuated lie by media and by society in an effort to keep them down. And they see this as the oppression that they live with on a daily basis. And that's the mentality these people have. And so now that you kind of understand that, we can jump head first. We can take a fucking swan dive right into the deep end of the crazy pool. And we're going to be doing that by looking at a Tumblr, like I said. This is thinprivilege.tumblr.com. And I'm sure, a majority of you who are watching this video have probably heard of this fucking Tumblr. It's pretty infamous. Now, you could look at something like this and say, holy shit, this has to be somebody trolling. This cannot fucking be real. And you could be right. At some level, this might be the most elaborate troll, that's ever been put out there. But the thing to keep in mind as we move forward, even if this specific Tumblr were completely fictitious, even if the people running it were just trolling out of their ass, there are a lot of people that believe it. That's the scary fucking thing. I mean, that's the scary fucking thing about Tumblr in general. And you'll see that as this series goes on. That there are going to be a couple future episodes where we're going to look specifically at Tumblrs that created bullshit issues that were made by trolls just fucking around. And they actually were taken seriously and it became something. That's how fucking nuts Tumblr is. So without further ado, right, now that we've got a basic idea of what we're getting into, let's take a look at thististhinprivilege.tumblr.com. Well, we are off to a good start. This is Thin Privilege has an FAQ section. As you know, I don't like to be uninformed, and an FAQ section is great. It helps me check that privilege to make sure I don't hurt any special snowflakes and make them melt. So let's pop in here and see what we have. Number 2 seems interesting. What is thin privilege? Now, this has a little errata. It's got a little warning up top. If you don't know what the social justice concept of privilege means more generally, then please read this first. Now, this links to a PDF document. It's a few pages long and generally explains what privilege is, at least how Tumblr uses it. The interesting thing is, I'm not familiar with this website, feminist.com. I'm curious what that could be about. Maybe it's a site about Legos. Dedicated to building. I have no idea. I've never been there. Let's go take a look. Now, this has nothing to do with Legos. It looks more like it's feminism. I never saw that coming. I didn't foresee that. Not in a million years. I mean, why would this be related to feminism? I mean, you might say it's because the majority of the site authors, all of them perhaps, are female, obese females. But not me. I didn't know that. So this is a shock to me. Anyway, back to what is thin privilege. Thin privilege systematically reduces each of us to our dress size, hip measurement, and waist size, then grants favors, opportunities, or simple lack of punishment when the numbers are low enough. Thin privilege exists no matter how it's won, no matter whether the thin person wants privilege or not, no matter how much a fat person wishes they had access to those privileges as a result of their own good behavior, character, or health. So to sum up, if you're thin, you have privilege. There's nothing you can do to get rid of it. You can never absolve yourself of it. You're born into it. It's sort of like the left's idea of original sin. Any form of privilege really falls into that definition. You'll never shake yourself free of it. And that's exactly how it's used on this Tumblr. Let's see if there's more information. Maybe I'm reading too much into this. Oh, here's one. Where's the line between skinny and fat, or who has thin privilege? Thin privilege exists on a spectrum and can be experienced contextually. The spectrum part means that though Susie might be fat, she could have more thin privilege than fatter Georgia, and less thin privilege than thinner Maria. The contextual part means that within certain communities, people who would be considered thin in other communities might be subject to some kinds of fat discrimination. The way to think of it is that if you have access to something now that a fatter you wouldn't have access to, or if you're not subject to a form of discrimination a fatter you would be subject to, you probably have thin privilege. It's strange, but I'm left with a question. Now, based on how most social justice warriors and Tumblrettes use the idea of privilege, it's this innate thing that you're born with, you can't shake it loose. A straight man can't just become gay, and a white man can't just become black and get rid of that privilege they have. But this FAQ, though, it seems to imply that a thin person can get rid of thin privilege by becoming fat. In this example, they're talking about Georgia and Maria and how they rate each other on this spectrum of fatness. So, couldn't you technically become morbidly obese and have the least amount of privilege? I mean, if you shoot for the stars, if you aim for the moon and you just eat nothing but moon pies and Twinkies and you gain 500, 700 pounds, who knows, and become fucking enormous, and then you tell somebody who, I don't know, runs this blog in particular, that they need to check that fucking thin privilege, would they have to listen? But really, when you're looking at this, if you can get rid of it, in the context of how these people use it, it's not really a privilege, is it? I don't know. That's probably the fat oppression speaking. All that mass media is making me say crazy things. Let's move on. Let's look at a few more of these questions, get a better idea what we're dealing with here. Oh, here's a good one. What about health? Let me make this completely clear from the outset, that I do not believe health, however defined, is a reasonable measure to determine whether or not someone deserves respect, civil rights, and fair treatment. If you have a problem with how health markets appropriation your premiums, or where your taxes go, then by all means, rage against the system. But do not think for a minute your assholish behavior towards people you imagine use more than their fair share is justified. In fact, I'll go further and state that in my opinion, the modern conception of health is bullshit. It's an ever-changing, largely arbitrary definition that seems to serve a single purpose: to blame modern ills on so-called unhealthy people, then define so-called unhealthy people as unpopular social deviants, like fat people, poor people, and the disabled. The philosophy of vaunting the modern notion of health to some kind of societal or moral imperative is called healthism. Perhaps there are those of you who ask, what about when someone's so fat it's medically unhealthy? Shouldn't you tell them to lose weight out of friendly or familial concern? Hell no. Why would your friends be a better witness to your experience than you are? If they are, then don't you have bigger presumed problems than your weight? Why would they know what's healthy for you better than you do? Again, if they do, don't you have bigger presumed problems than your weight? How in the world could you possibly avoid hearing, in our current cultural climate, that fat people should lose weight for their health? Treat people with respect. Don't infantilize or condescend to them. This is Adult Interaction 101 here. Further, it can't be said enough. The BMI, the general classification system for fat health oppression, is bullshit. Well, goddamn, I'm sensing a little hostility here.
Oh, Miss Piggy appears angry.
This seems like it was written by somebody who was a little angry, a little bit mad. But what really piques my interest is that third paragraph, specifically talking about familial concern or friendly concern about your health. How dare somebody tell you that they're concerned about that? How could they know better than you do your current situation? Now, for anybody who's ever been a part of an intervention or seen one on television like A&E's intervention series, this strikes me as junkie logic. I mean, let's rewrite it. Let's reword this. Let's pretend this wasn't on thisisthinprivilege.com, but heroinjunkie.com. You know, imagine this was a Tumblr written by a drug user. And just reword it. Take out all those instances of fat and, thin and replace it with drug use and sober. This could have been written by somebody who's strung out on heroin.
I'm walking on sunshine. I wish I had a father.
Yeah, pretty much like that. Yeah, that to a T, actually. This seems insane, really, to be honest. This is something I would expect a junkie to say. I mean, it's that fucking stupid. I don't know, maybe that's just me. Again, that's probably that fat oppressor deep down inside of me screaming about fat people, because I'm just naturally programmed to hate everything. I'm a white male and I like women. So, God, I'm responsible for slavery and the Holocaust and think of anything, really. It's probably my fault. Let's move on a little bit more. Let's look at a little bit more of this wonderful Tumblr. Oh, here's one. Speaking of attraction, but what if I'm not attracted to fat people? Why should I feel guilty about that? How is that thin privilege? Thin privilege exists on a societal level. When people, mainly women, are being seen in aggregate as less worthwhile dating and marriage material than thin people, being rejected for daring to be fat is fat discrimination, and hence being seen as better dating material by virtue of being thin is thin privilege. Dating while fat generally puts you at a disadvantage in a fat-phobic culture, as if the likelihood of being a good partner has something to do with the amount of adipose tissue on one's body. Of course it doesn't. Not to mention that dating sites usually have you state up front in your profile whether you're fat or not, and there's an option for people to select if being fat is a deal breaker and a potential partner. And there's a whole meme about how fat people, usually women, pretend to be thinner on their profiles in order to ensnare poor fat-phobic hot dudes. I'm glad this Tumblr is obviously not written by angry, obese white women who are very, very upset that they're not getting laid. I'm thrilled that this is written by not those people, because it so obviously is not written by them, right? This is crazy on a lot of levels, I'm going to be honest. Essentially what it's saying is, if you're not attracted to a fat person, you're terrible, and there's no reason you shouldn't be attracted to a fat person other than you're some kind of horrible fat-phobic individual. As a side note, I don't get the whole phobic thing. Homophobic, fat-phobic. I don't understand that. You're not afraid of them. I'm not afraid of fat people. I just don't want to fuck them. How is that discrimination? And they talk about being upfront on a dating site. Why wouldn't you be upfront on a dating site? You're talking about starting an intimate relationship with somebody, right? I'm guessing that's why you're going to a dating site. How do you build a relationship? You build it on honesty. And if you're not honest up front, then the relationship is a fraud. So I'm not sure what exactly they're upset about. From their standpoint, they're saying they're angry that they have to admit to being fat, really. I mean, is what it comes down to, because they are not going to be selected by the people they want to select them. Well, what do you want? Do you want somebody who doesn't want you and rejects you later on because you lied to them? Do you want to date somebody who you conceive to be shallow just because they're attractive? I'm not understanding exactly where you're coming from with this. I think I'm starting to notice a bit of a trend here. Let's see if that continues out. Now, we looked at the FAQ, but let's go look at the posts themselves. These are put up by different people, and then the mods and the admins presumably pick the ones they like and throw them up. Thin Privilege is going for an eye test and seeing a poster advising people that staying trim is a way to look after your eyes. Well, I don't get that. How is that Thin Privilege? That seems like basic medical advice to me. Be healthy, stay healthy. So I maybe I need to get my eyes checked because I don't see your fucking point with this. Let's take a look at another one. Maybe that's a bad one. Here we go. Thin Privilege is not having to drastically change your normally quiet, reserved personality in order to be taken seriously by friends, coworkers, employers, or anyone in general. Well, that's just plain wrong. Many people alter their behavior based on a social situation. I mean, that's completely mundane. Everybody does that. You don't think people behave differently with their family and friends compared to their office place or church or synagogue or mosque, what have you? You don't think they act differently? Of course they do. That's not being thin. That's fucking being a person. Let's move on. I'm still not getting this. Let's take a look at another one here. This is Thin Privilege. Not having a small child point at you and say, "Look, mummy, look how fat that person is," and all the nearby people laughing as if it's cute, whilst you stand there, insulted and upset. Do you work at the circus? I don't, how is that happening? 4 times a day? Really? 4 times a day? People will just gather in a circle around you and start laughing and commenting about how fat you are? No, I don't fucking buy that. This is complete bullshit. Let's take a look at another one here. Thin Privilege is not being concern trolled by not only nurses, but also your online friends when you have an unrelated condition. I play an online MMO video game, in which I have a group of friends called a guild. My guild knows that I am well over 400 pounds in real... Okay, fuck this. I didn't know V had access to this fucking Tumblr. This is not real. These posts are just stupid. This is beyond retarded. Just look at a few of these different headlines. This is just from the first 50 pages. There are 230 pages of these posts. Just take a look at this. Thin Privilege is having dogs play with you, apparently. Thin Privilege is a choice in sexual preferences. Thin Privilege is woodwind instruments. Thin Privilege is not being physically assaulted by your babysitter. What in the fuck are you talking about? Apparently thin children don't get molested or assaulted. That's part of their privilege. Thin Privilege is being able to laugh at jokes about fat people. No, that's called having a fucking sense of humor. These people are beyond delusional. They're just upset. A lot of these posts have to do with eating and feeling bad about it, or not being sexually attractive, or just being pissed off that they're overweight to begin with. But what makes it really crazy, like I said, it's not a rationalization. What makes it really crazy is they're happy to be fat. They think it's great, that there are no negative side effects to it, that everybody who tells them that are assholes and trolls, that being fat will not make you sick or die young. What can you say to something like that? Well, I guess maybe I have one final thing to say. That picture I used in the beginning, yeah, that one. That particular picture happens to come from an article back from 2009 in The Guardian. The whole article in itself was simply her talking about her concern for her brother's health and how he was overweight and the impact that would have on him, and she was scared she was going to lose him young in his life. It was, it's a touching article. The sad part is, 2 hours after she posted it, he died of exactly the things that she was afraid of. Just some food for thought, and God knows you love your food.